Hello friends, welcome to Premier UPSC IAS. So continuing with the environment lectures, today is the part 6 of environment lectures pertaining to Prelims UPSC IAS. Okay. The first topic here is the UN Decade for Desert and Fight Against the Desertification from 2010 to 2020. United Nations General Assembly declared the United Nations Decade for Deserts and the Fight Against Desertification, which runs from January 2010 to December 2020 to promote action that will protect the drylands. It was decided due to the concern about the deteriorating situation of desertification in all regions. This situation has far-reaching implications for the attainment of sustainable development goals, particularly the eradication of poverty and ensuring the environmental sustainability. The decade events and campaigns are spearheaded by the following UN agencies: UN Department of Public Information, International Fund for Agricultural Development, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, United Nations Development Program, and United Nations Environment Program. So all these events and campaigns are actually headed by the UN agencies. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, very important topic. IPCC 1988. The IPCC is the UN body for assessing the science and researchers related to climate change. It was established by the following organization in 1988: United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and World Meteorological Organization, that is WMO. It was created to provide policymakers with the following: regular scientific assessments concerning climate change, its implications and potential future risks, and to put forward adaptation and mitigation strategies. The IPCC does not conduct its own research. IPCC assessments provide governments at all levels with scientific information that they can use to develop climate policies. IPCC assessments are a key input into the international negotiations to tackle the climate change. So IPCC does not conduct its own research, but IPCC assessments are a key input into the international negotiations to tackle the climate change. IPCC reports are drafted and reviewed in several stages, thus guaranteeing objectivity and transparency. In 2007, the IPCC was jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize with US Vice President Al Gore for their efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change and to lay the foundations for the measures that are needed to counteract such change. Three working groups. IPCC has the following three working groups: Working Group 1, Working Group 2, and Working Group 3. Group 1 dealing with the physical science basis of climate change. Group 2 dealing with the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. Group 3 dealing with the mitigation of climate change. IPCC assessment reports consist of contributions from each of the three working groups and a synthesis report. Special reports undertake an assessment of cross-disciplinary issues that span more than one working group and are shorter and more focused than the main assessments. It also has a task force on national greenhouse gas inventories that develops methodologies for measuring emissions and removals. Alongside the working groups and the task force, other task groups may be established by the panel for a set time period to consider a specific topic or question. Task group to improve gender balance and address gender related issues within the IPCC has been established in 2018. Special reports undertake an assessment of cross-disciplinary 1 and 2 task force on national greenhouse gas inventories. Alongside the working groups and the task force, other task groups may be established by the panel for a set time period to consider a specific topic or question. Task group to improve gender balance and address gender-related issues within the IPCC has been established in 2018. Objectives and aims. assessing and controlling marine pollution by development and adoption of protocols that prescribe measures, procedures, and regulations, and by using the best environmental practices. Sustainable management of natural, marine, and coastal resources, protecting the natural and cultural heritage, integrating the environment into economic and social development, strengthening solidarity by promoting cooperation between countries bordering the Mediterranean, contributing to improving the quality of life. The reports. In 1990, the first assessment report FAR, underlined the importance of climate change as a challenge with global consequences and requiring international cooperation. It played a decisive role in the creation of the UNFCCC. In 1995, the second assessment report SAR provided important material for governments to draw from in the run-up to the adoption of Kyoto Protocol in 1997. In 2001, the third assessment report focused attention on the impacts of climate change and the need for adaptation. In 2007, the fourth assessment report, AR4, laid the groundwork for a post-Kyoto agreement focusing on limiting warming to 2 degrees centigrade. The fifth assessment report, AR5, was finalized between 2013 and 2014. It provided the scientific input into the Paris Agreement in 2015. The IPCC is currently in its sixth assessment cycle, where it will prepare three special reports, a methodology report, and a sixth assessment report. The third report of these six assessments was released recently in 2023. The sixth assessment report, AR6, is expected to be finalized in 2022. It was actually finalized for the first global stock the following year. Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer. Vienna Convention. In 1981, United Nations Environment Programme acted on a proposal to develop a global convention on the ozone layer. Subsequently, a multilateral environmental agreement was signed during the Vienna Conference in 1985 and entered into force in 1988. It is one of the most successful treaties of all time in terms of universality. It has been ratified by 197 states as well as the European Union. India has ratified it in 1991. It established global monitoring and reporting on ozone depletion. It also created a framework for the development of protocols for taking more binding action. The Montreal Protocol under the Vienna Convention, the protocol was agreed in 1987. The Vienna Convention and its Montreal Protocol are the first and only global environmental treaties to achieve universal ratification with 197 parties. However, it does not include legally binding reduction goals for the use of chlorofluorocarbons, which are the main chemical agents causing ozone depletion. The Montreal Protocol. The Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer is the landmark multilateral environmental agreement. It regulates the production and consumption of ozone depleting substances ODS. Under this treaty, all parties have specific responsibilities related to the phase out of different groups of ozone depleting substances, control of ozone depleting substances trade, annual reporting of data, national licensing systems to control ODS imports and exports, and other matters. Throughout the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, developing countries have demonstrated that with the right kind of assistance, they are willing, ready, and able to be full partners in global efforts to protect the environment. In fact, many developing countries have exceeded the reduction targets for phasing out ODS with the support of the multilateral fund. Developing and developed countries have equal but differentiated responsibilities. But most importantly, both groups of countries have binding, time targeted, and measurable commitments. Multilateral Fund. The Multilateral Fund for the implementation of the Montreal Protocol was established in 1991 under the treaty. The fund's objective is to provide financial and technical assistance to developing country parties to the Montreal Protocol. Only for the countries whose annual per capita consumption and production of ODS is less than zero point 0.3 kg to comply with the control measures of the protocol. Multilateral funds activities are implemented by the following four international agencies as well as bilateral agencies of countries: UNEP, UNDP, and United Nations Industrial Development Organization UNIDO and World Bank. Substances covered. The Montreal Protocol controls nearly 100 chemicals that are grouped in the following categories: chlorofluorocarbons, halogens, carbon tetrachloride, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, HCFC, methyl chloroform, methyl bromide. Phase out of the HCFCs. The transition from the CFCs, that is chlorofluorocarbons, high ozone depleting potential or ODP, to intermediate HCFCs with lower ozone depleting potential has been completed, and the final transition is to alternatives that have zero ODP. Hydrofluorocarbons are gases used worldwide in refrigeration, air conditioning, and foam applications. Recognizing the potential benefits to the Earth's climate in 2007, the parties decided to accelerate their schedule to phase out HCFCs. Developed countries have been reducing their consumption of HCFCs and will completely phase them out by 2020. Developing countries agreed to start their phase out process in 2013 and are now following a stepwise reduction until the complete phase out of the HCFCs by 2030. Phase out of HFCs. Another group of substances, hydrofluorocarbons, were introduced as non-ozone depleting alternatives to support the timely phase out of CFCs and HCFCs. HCFCs are now HFCs are now widespread in air conditioners, refrigerators, aerosols, foams, and other products. While these chemicals do not deplete the stratospheric ozone layer, some of them have high global warming potential, ranging from 12 to 14,000. The parties to the Montreal Protocol reached an agreement at their 28th meeting of the parties in 2016 in Kigali, Rwanda, to phase down HFCs. Countries agreed to add HFCs to the list of controlled substances and approved a timeline for their gradual reduction by 80 to 85% by the late 2040s. A key upcoming challenge for developing countries will be to simultaneously implement the timely phase out of their remaining HCFC consumption while at the same time preparing for the phase down of HFCs. This is particularly crucial for the refrigeration and air conditioning servicing sector, which represents the majority of the HCFC and HFC consumption in most countries. Why is Montreal Protocol important? As a result of the international agreement, the ozone hole in the Antarctica is slowly recovering. Climate projections indicate that the ozone layer will return to 1980 levels between 2050 and 2070, so it can be termed as successful treaty. To date, the parties to the protocol have phased out 98% of the ozone depleting substances globally compared to 1990 levels. Because most of these substances are potent greenhouse gases, the Montreal Protocol is also contributing significantly to the protection of the global climate system. The Montreal Protocol also makes important contributions to the realization of the UN Sustainable Development Goals 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, and 17. The Montreal Protocol is to protect the Earth's ozone layer by eliminating the use of ozone depleting substances which would otherwise allow increased UV radiation to reach the Earth, resulting in the higher incidence of skin cancers and eye cataracts, more compromised immune systems, and negative effects on watersheds, agricultural lands, and forests. It has been estimated, for example, that the Montreal Protocol is saving an estimated 2 million people each year by 2030 from skin cancer. Kigali Amendment of 2016. In 2016, the parties to the Montreal Protocol adopted the agreement on the HFCs at the close of 28th meeting of the parties MOP 28 in Kigali, Rwanda. The Kigali Amendment entered into force on 1st January 2019 following ratification by 65 countries. Kigali Amendment amends the Montreal Protocol of 1987 with aim to phase out hydrofluorocarbons, a family of potent greenhouse gases, by the late 2040s. The amendment also includes the agreements on technologies to destroy HFCs, data reporting requirements, and provisions for capacity building for developing countries. Under this amendment, in all 197 countries, including India, China, and the USA, have agreed to a timeline to reduce the use of HFCs by roughly 85% of their baselines by 2045. In recent times, it was found that HFCs have several thousand times heat retaining capacity in the atmosphere when compared to that of a carbon dioxide, a potent greenhouse gas. Thus, it can be said that HFCs have helped the ozone layer but have contributed towards increasing global warming. At present, HFCs are the world's fastest growing greenhouse gases, with emissions increasing by up to 10% every year. All signatory nations have been divided into three groups, with different timelines to go about reductions of the HFCs. It includes Group 1, includes rich countries like US, European Union, etc. They have to freeze production and consumption of HFCs by 2018. They will reduce the HFC emission to about 15% of 2012 levels by 2036. Group 2. It includes countries like Brazil, China, and all of the African countries. They will freeze the use of HFCs by 2024 and cut into 20% of 2021 levels by 2045. Group 3, India, it includes countries like India, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, etc. They would be freezing HFC use by 2028 and reducing it to about 15% of 2025 levels by 2047. Why is Kigali Amendments important? Now, it also includes HFCs that are responsible for global warming. This amendment will help to prevent a potential zero point 0.5 degree Celsius rise in global temperature by the end of the century. This amendment will be binding on countries from 2019 onwards. It also contains the provision of penalties for non-compliance. Under this amendment, developed countries will provide enhanced funding support estimated at billions of dollars to help developing worlds. HFOs, hydrofluoroolefins. HFOs are a new class of unsaturated HFC refrigerants. They have lower global warming potentials and shorter atmospheric lifetimes when compared to other HFCs. HFOs are not included as substances to be phased down in the Kigali Amendments. For hazardous chemicals and wastes, BRS conventions. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, together considered as BRS conventions, are multilateral global environmental agreements. Basel Convention on Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and Their Disposal of 1989. Rotterdam Convention on Prior Informed Consent Procedure for Certain Hazardous Chemicals and Pesticides of 1998. Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants (POPs) of 2004. They share the common objective of protecting human health and the environment from hazardous chemicals and wastes. The Basel Convention of 1989. The Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Wastes and Their Disposal was adopted in 1989 by the Conference of Plenipotentiaries in Basel, Switzerland. The convention entered into force in 1992. It was the result of public outcry following the discovery in 1980s in Africa and other parts of the developing world of deposits of toxic wastes imported from abroad. The overarching objective of the Basel Convention is to protect human health and the environment against the adverse effects of hazardous waste. The Basel Protocol on liability and compensation for damage resulting from transboundary movements of hazardous wastes and their disposal was adopted by COP5 in 1999. The Bali Declaration on Waste Management for Human Health and Livelihood, adopted by COP9 in 2008, has affirmed at the political level that waste, if not managed in a safe and environmentally sound manner, may have serious consequences for the environment, human health, and sustainable livelihoods. Its scope of application covers a wide range of wastes defined as hazardous waste based on their origin and or composition and their characteristics, as well as two types of waste defined as other wastes: household waste and incinerator ash. However, it does not address the movement of radioactive wastes. Aims and provisions. The provisions of the convention center around the following principal aims: the reduction of hazardous waste generation and the promotion of environmentally sound management of hazardous waste wherever the place of disposal, the restriction of transboundary movements of hazardous waste except where it is perceived to be in accordance with the principles of environmentally sound management, and a regulatory system applying to cases where transboundary movements are permissible. Rotterdam Convention, 1998. It was adopted on 10 September 1998 by a conference of plenipotentiaries in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. The convention entered into force on 24 February 2004. It was built on voluntary PIC procedure initiated by UNEP and FAO in 1989 that was seized on 24 February 2006. The convention provides for legally binding obligations for the implementation of the prior informed consent PIC procedure. India is the party to this convention. The objectives of the convention are the following: to promote shared responsibility and cooperative efforts among parties in the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals in order to protect human health and the environment from potential harm, to contribute to the environmentally sound use of those hazardous chemicals by facilitating information exchange about their characteristics, by providing for a national decision making process on their import and export, and by disseminating these decisions to parties. Stockholm Convention 2004. The Stockholm Convention is an international environmental treaty under the aegis of the UN. It was opened for signature in 2001 in Stockholm, Sweden, and became effective in 2004. It aims to protect the human health and the environment from persistent organic pollutants. It focuses to eliminate or restrict the production and use of persistent organic pollutants spores. It has 180 parties, and India is also a party to this treaty. The Stockholm Convention is perhaps best understood as having five essential aims: eliminate dangerous POPs, starting with 12 worst, support the transition to safer alternatives, target additional POPs for action, clean up old stockpiles and equipment containing POPs, work together for a POP free future. The Global Environmental Facility (GEF) is the designated financial mechanism for the Stockholm Convention. Initially, 12 POPs were added to the list, but later on, more POPs has been added. As POPs can be reviewed and added to the convention if they meet certain criteria for persistence and transboundary threat, that is, list of POPs can change and evolve over time. There is a provision that developed countries provide new and additional financial resources and measures to minimize regulate POPs to developing nations. POPs. Persistent organic pollutants or POPs are organic chemical substances, that is, they are carbon based. Though not soluble in water, POPs are readily absorbed in fatty tissue, where concentrations can become magnified by up to 70,000 times the background levels. Fish, predatory birds, mammals, and humans are high up the food chain and so absorb the greatest concentrations. When they travel, the POPs travel with them. As a result, POPs can be found in people and animals living in regions such as Arctic, thousands of kilometers from any major POP source. They possess a particular combination of physical and chemical properties such that once released in the environment, they remain intact for exceptionally long periods of time, many years. They become widely distributed throughout the environment as a result of natural processes involving soil, water, and most notably air. They accumulate in the fatty tissue of living organisms, including humans, and are found at higher concentrations at higher levels in the food chain and are toxic to both humans and wildlife. Specific effects of the POPs can include such as cancer, allergies, and hypersensitivity, damage to the central and peripheral nervous systems, reproductive disorders, and disruption of the human immune system. Some POPs are also considered to be endocrine disruptors, which, by altering the hormonal system, can damage the reproductive aid and immune systems of exposed individuals as well as their offspring. They can also have developmental and carcinogenic effects. POPs under the Stockholm Convention. Initially, 12 POPs have been recognized as causing adverse effects on humans and the ecosystem, and these can be placed in three categories: 1. Pesticides, 2. Industrial chemicals, 3. Byproducts. Pesticides: aldrin, chlordane, DDT, dieldrin, endrin, heptachlor, hexachlorobenzene, Mirex, toxaphene are the pesticides. Industrial chemicals like hexachlorobenzene, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and byproducts like hexachlorobenzene, polychlorinated dibenzopidioxins, and polychlorinated dibenzofurans, and PCBs. For natural disasters, UN World Conferences for Disaster Risk Reduction. World Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction 2005 Hyogo Framework of Action. The conference had to take stock of progress in disaster risk reduction accomplished since the Yokohama Conference of 1994 and to make plans for the next 10 years from 2005 to 2015 and then later further. It represented a strong commitment of the international community to address the disaster reduction and to engage in determined results-oriented plan of action for the next decade. These have resulted in the Hyogo Declaration and Hyogo Framework of Action. Building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters is the first plan to explain, describe, and detail the work that is required from all different sectors and actors to reduce disaster losses. It was developed and agreed on with the many partners needed to reduce disaster risk, governments, international agencies, disaster experts, and many others, bringing them into a common system of coordination. Its goal is to substantially reduce disaster losses by 2015 by building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. This means reducing the loss of lives and social, economic, and environmental assets when hazards strike. Five priority actions. HAP outlines five, that is a Hyogo framework, okay? Priorities for action and offers guiding principles and practical means for achieving disaster resilience. Priority action one. Ensure that disaster risk reduction is a national and a local priority with a strong institutional basis for implementation. Priority action two. Identify, assess, and monitor disaster risks and enhance early warning. Priority Action 3. Use knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of safety and resilience at all levels. Priority Action 4. Reduce the underlying risk factors. Priority Action 5. Strengthen disaster preparedness for effective response at all levels. Third, UN World Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction Sendai Framework of 2015 to 2030. The Sendai Framework is a successor instrument to the Hyogo Framework for Action (HFA) 2005-2015, building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. The Sendai Framework was adopted by the UN member states on 18 March 2015 at the third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai City, Miyagi Prefecture, Japan. The Sendai Framework is a 15-year voluntary non-binding agreement. It recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce the risks related to disasters, but that responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, including local government, the private sector, and the stakeholders. It aims for the following outcome: the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health, and in the social, economic, physical, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. Four priority actions. Priority 1 Understanding the disaster risk. Priority 2 Strengthening the disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Priority 3 Investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. Priority 4 Enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Seven global targets. substantially reduce global disaster mortality by 2030, aiming to lower our average per 1 lakh global mortality rate in the decade 2020-2030 compared to the period 2005 to 2015. Substantially reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030, aiming to lower the average global figure per 1 lakh in the decade 2020-2030 compared to the period 2005 to 2015. Reduce direct disaster economic loss in relation to the global gross domestic product GDP by 2030. Substantially reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, among them health and educational facilities, including through developing their resilience by 2030. Substantially increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2020. Substantially enhance international cooperation in developing countries. Substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments to the people by 2030.